First on Fox, breaking news right now in a local missing persons case, which is being followed in Tennessee and all across the nation tonight.
911, what's your emergency?
Yes, I need to contact 911.
This is him. What's wrong, man?
Listen, 681 Swan Johnson Road. Somebody has my daughter. Somebody is looking like that, Holly. Ragnar took her to the woods. Please, get everybody out.
The man is charged with the kidnapping and murder of Holly Bobo almost 3 years after the 20-year-old from Decatur County disappeared.
Now tonight, Fox 17 has team coverage as Zachary Adams, the suspect. He is now in the Chester County Jail, indicted in this case. The question at this point, how law enforcement linked him to Holly Bobo's disappearance and murder.
A mother called her son from work on a Wednesday morning in April 2011. She told him to look outside, to check on his sister who was supposed to be leaving for class. When he looked through the window, he saw something that made absolutely no sense to him. His sister was outside talking to someone, and within 5 minutes, she would disappear. For 3.5 years, no one would know where she went, what happened to her, or who took her. And when the truth finally came out, when arrests were made and trials were held and justice seemed to be served, something happened that changed everything. The entire case collapsed, because the person whose testimony sent a man to prison for life admitted he made the whole thing up. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. And because this case will make you question every conviction you have ever trusted, every witness you have ever believed, every verdict you thought was certain. Drop a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. This is not a simple story with a simple ending. This is a story that is still unfinished. Before I show you what happened on that April morning, before I explain why this case fell apart in spectacular fashion, you need to understand where this took place, because location is everything in this story. Darden, Tennessee, population 387, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where your business is everyone's business, where trust is not naive. It is necessity. This is 2011. Cell phones are common, but GPS tracking is basic. Social media is just emerging. There are no Ring doorbells. No surveillance cameras on every corner. People still leave their doors unlocked. Children walk to school alone. Everyone watches out for everyone else's kids. And men in camouflage walking through the woods at dawn is as normal as Sunday church service. Because this is hunting country. Deep Bible Belt territory where families have lived on the same land for generations. The woods are not dangerous. The woods are home. Until April 13th, 2011, when everything changed. Holly Lynn Bobo was 20 years old. A nursing student at the University of Tennessee, studying at their Parsons Center. While other 20-year-olds were figuring out their majors or partying, Holly knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life. Help people heal. She was shy, but determined. The kind of person who worked twice as hard as everyone else to achieve her dreams. Her professors remembered her name. Her dedication stood out. Holly was in a serious relationship with Drew Scott. They had been together long enough that friends were expecting an engagement announcement. Drew was the kind of boyfriend parents approve of. Respectful, hardworking, someone who understood Holly's ambitions and supported them. Her family embodied everything good about small-town Tennessee. Dana Bobo worked construction, a man who built things with his hands, who provided for his family through honest labor. Karen Bobo was the kind of mother who knew where her children were at all times. Clint Bobo was Holly's younger brother, protective, the kind of kid who loved his sister fiercely. The Bobo home sat on rural property surrounded by dense Tennessee woods. Holly's grandmother owned adjacent land where the family would hunt. This was not unusual. In Decatur County, hunting was as natural as breathing. April 12, 2011 was Holly's last normal day. She spent it studying for her nursing exam, talking with friends, living the life of a focused college student on the verge of achieving everything she had worked for. She had no idea that in less than 12 hours, her name would be known across America for all the wrong reasons. But here is what you need to understand about what comes next, about the 12 minutes that changed everything. Now, let me show you what happened on April 13th, the timeline that transformed an ordinary Wednesday into every parent's Worst fear were 30 a.m. Holly's alarm clock pierced the pre-dawn darkness. This was not unusual. Holly often rose early to study. She had a nursing exam that day, and she never took her education lightly. The house was quiet. Her parents were preparing to leave for work. Clint was still asleep. 7:30 a.m. Holly's phone rang. It was Drew Scott calling from the woods on Holly's grandmother's property where he was turkey hunting. This was normal. Drew often hunted the family land. They talked multiple times throughout the day. It was a brief conversation, probably checking in before her exam, maybe making plans for later. At 8:42 a.m., Holly made her final outgoing phone call. 12 minutes. That is all that separated Holly's normal life from what came next. After 7:42 a.m., every call and text to Holly's phone would go unanswered forever. By this time, Dana and Karen had left for work. Clint was still sleeping. The family dogs began barking frantically, the kind of aggressive barking that means danger. A neighbor would later report hearing a scream from the direction of the Bobo property. And here is what makes the next few minutes so critical, so devastating, so impossible to undo. Around 8 a.m., Clint was jolted awake by the dogs. He looked out his window toward the garage. What he saw seemed completely normal at first. His sister Holly kneeling on the ground, facing a man dressed in full camouflage from head to toe. They appeared to be having an intense conversation. Holly sounded very upset. The man was doing most of the talking, and she would answer back. Clint could barely make out any words, but the few he caught would echo in his mind forever. Holly saying, "No."
Why?
Her voice filled with confusion and fear. But here is the fatal assumption that cost precious time. Clint thought he was watching his sister argue with her boyfriend, Drew. Think about that for a second. Drew hunted these woods regularly. Drew often wore camouflage. From a distance, it looked like a couple having a heated conversation. But here is the call that changed everything. The moment that turned assumption into terror. Then Clint's mother, Karen, called the house. When Clint mentioned what he was seeing, Karen's response was immediate and terrifying. "Clint, that's not Drew. Get a gun and shoot him." But it was too late. By the time Clint processed what his mother had said, by the time he looked outside again, he watched in horror as Holly walked into the dense Tennessee woods with the stranger. She was walking and not being dragged, either willingly or under some kind of threat that made resistance impossible. Clint ran outside with a loaded pistol, but they were gone. In the garage, where he had seen Holly kneeling, he made a discovery that turned his blood cold. Holly's blood. Fresh stains on the concrete. Evidence of violence. Proof that whatever happened here was not a simple argument. And here is the critical mistake that may have cost Holly her life. The error that gave her abductor the one thing he needed most. Now here is what went wrong in those critical first minutes. What mistakes were made that may have cost Holly her life. Clint immediately dialed 911, but even that went wrong. His mother, Karen, was calling from her workplace in a different county. She reached the wrong dispatcher initially. Precious minutes were lost while the trail grew cold. When the correct authorities were finally contacted, law enforcement arrived at the Bobo residence exactly 10 minutes after Clint's call. 10 minutes. In a kidnapping, that might as well be 10 hours. Police immediately began canvassing the area, deploying canine units to track Holly's scent into the woods, but the trail was already cold. The dogs lost the scent quickly in the dense forest. The one advantage investigators had was technology. Holly's cell phone was still active. Cell tower pings showed her phone moving away from her home tower, heading north toward Interstate 40. The digital breadcrumbs painted a terrifying picture. Holly was being taken further from safety toward places where she could disappear forever. Within hours, Decatur County had mobilized the largest search operation in its history. Hundreds of volunteers poured in from across Tennessee. The story captured national media attention. A beautiful nursing student vanishing in broad daylight from her own home. Now here is what investigators found in those first few days. The clues that should have led them to Holly. On April 15th, just 2 days after Holly disappeared, searchers found the first piece of evidence: Holly's lunchbox. Discovered in the woods on Bible Hill Road, not far from the Bobo home. Inside was a sandwich and a card embroidered with a letter H, heartbreaking proof that Holly had packed lunch for a school day she would never see. But here is what nobody understood yet, what those scattered pieces of evidence were trying to tell investigators. Holly had been taken somewhere specific, somewhere close, and whoever took her knew exactly where he was going. But here is what nobody understood yet, what the evidence was trying to tell them. More items were found. A receipt with Holly's name, a school card. Each discovery raised hopes and crushed them simultaneously. Proof Holly had been there, but no sign of Holly herself. Early in the investigation, authorities focused heavily on Terry Britt, a registered sex offender who matched Clint's description of the man in camouflage. His home was wiretapped, searched, put under surveillance. But despite fitting the profile perfectly, investigators could not make the case stick. As days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, one terrible reality became clear. Holly Bobo had vanished without a trace, and whoever took her was still out there. For 3.5 years, the Holly Bobo case consumed Tennessee law enforcement. Multiple suspects were brought in, questioned, and cleared. Every lead turned into a dead end. But Dana and Karen Bobo never gave up hope. They organized search parties that brought thousands of volunteers to Decatur County. They kept Holly's name in the headlines. They kept the pressure on law enforcement. Their determination was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Parents who refused to accept that their daughter was gone forever. The case attracted massive national media attention. America's Most Wanted featured Holly's disappearance multiple times. But as 2011 became 2012 and 2012 became 2013, and still no Holly, the terrible reality began to set in. The massive searches became smaller. The media attention faded. Except Holly's family never stopped believing she would come home. And then on September 7th, 2014, 3.5 years after Holly vanished, someone finally found her. Larry Stone was just hunting ginseng when he made the discovery that would break a community's heart. It was an ordinary day in the woods of northern Decatur County, about 20 miles from the Bobo home. Stone and his cousin were foraging for the valuable root that grows wild in Tennessee forests. It was routine work. Until Stone spotted something that did not belong, an overturned bucket sitting alone in the woods. Curious, Stone flipped the bucket over. What he found underneath would haunt him forever. A human skull, weathered by 3.5 years in the Tennessee elements. Stone immediately broke down in tears. And he told his cousin, "Please tell me that's one of those things they use in school and that's not real." But deep down he already knew. And here is what that skull would reveal. What single piece of evidence would prove this was not just a kidnapping gone wrong? This was an execution. When investigators arrived, they discovered partial skeletal remains scattered across the forest floor. Holly's skull, several ribs, a shoulder blade, her teeth. But it was what they found in Holly's skull that confirmed everyone's worst fears. A bullet hole in the back of her head. The bullet had entered the back right side and traveled to the front left. Holly had not just been kidnapped. She had been executed. Near the remains, investigators found Holly's wallet containing her driver's license. Final proof that their 3-year search was over. DNA testing officially confirmed what everyone already knew. The remains belonged to Holly Lynn Bobo. For Dana and Karen Bobo, 3.5 years of hope came crashing down in an instant. Holly was coming home, but not the way they had prayed for. The question now was not whether Holly was dead. The question was who killed her, and whether they would ever face justice. But here is what nobody could have predicted. What would turn this murder investigation into one of Tennessee's most controversial cases? Now, here is where this case takes a turn that will make you question everything about the justice system. In March 2014, 6 months before Holly's remains were even found, arrests began. But those arrests were based on one of the most controversial confessions in Tennessee legal history. John Dylan Adams was arrested on unrelated weapons charges. Dylan was not your typical criminal. He was intellectually disabled with a mental capacity that made him highly susceptible to suggestion. During his interrogation, Dylan told police something that would change everything. He claimed he witnessed Holly Bobo alive at his brother's house after her abduction. According to Dylan's statement, he went to his brother Zach's residence on April 13th to get his truck. There, he allegedly saw Holly sitting in a green chair wearing a pink t-shirt. Dylan claimed Zach was wearing camouflage shorts and told him he had raped Holly and videotaped it. This confession led to the arrests of Zach Adams, Jason Wayne Autry, and Shane Kyle Austin. But here is the problem with Dylan's confession, the detail that destroys the entire case. Dylan Adams later recanted his entire story. And here is why that matters more than anything else in this entire investigation. He claimed investigators had coerced him, kept him up all night without food or water until he finally said, "What do you want me to say?" Dylan's family insisted he was being manipulated. His mother described watching interrogation footage where TBI agents would correct Dylan's story. "Don't you mean this? Don't you mean it happened like this?" She could see the moment her son gave up and just started agreeing with whatever they suggested. But the damage was done. Based largely on this questionable confession from a vulnerable individual, 4 men were charged with Holly Bobo's kidnapping, rape, and murder. Let that sink in. A confession from an intellectually disabled man who later said he was coerced became the foundation for multiple murder charges. When the case finally went to trial, prosecutors presented a theory that seemed almost too bizarre to believe. They claimed the motive for Holly's abduction was not sexual assault or robbery. It was to teach her brother Clint how to make methamphetamine. According to the prosecution, the men went to the Bobo residence that morning specifically to involve Clint in drug manufacturing. When Holly emerged from the house screaming, they made the split-second decision to abduct her instead. Think about that theory for a second. Men planning to recruit someone into drug manufacturing just happen to kidnap his sister when she screams, and then rape and murder her instead. The prosecution would build their entire case on this bizarre theory, and a jury would have to decide whether to believe it. But here is the real foundation of their case, the testimony that would either convict or exonerate Zach Adams. The prosecution alleged that Holly was taken to a barn where she was raped by multiple attackers. Then the men decided to dispose of her body by the Tennessee River under the Interstate 40 bridge. And here is where Jason Autry's testimony became crucial, the testimony that would eventually unravel everything. Autry claimed that when they unloaded Holly's body from the truck bed, they realized she was still alive. At that point, according to Autry, Zach Adams shot Holly in the back of the head. Autry's testimony was graphic, detailed, and delivered with calm precision that made jurors believe every word. He described wrapping Holly in a multicolored blanket, loading her into the truck, driving to specific locations. His story had the ring of truth because he knew details that seemed impossible to fabricate. But there was one critical problem with Autry's testimony. He had access to all the discovery materials before he testified, meaning he could synchronize his story with the known evidence. He could insert Holly into a timeline that actually happened but had nothing to do with her. Now, here is what the prosecution's case against Zach Adams actually consisted of. No DNA linking him to the crime, no fingerprints, no physical evidence whatsoever. What they did have was a neighbor's report of seeing a white truck driving rapidly on the morning of Holly's disappearance. Zach Adams drove a white truck. They had alleged threatening statements. Adams's then-girlfriend testified that he told her he would tie her up just like he did Holly Bobo. They had a gun that was allegedly used to kill Holly, but forensic tests failed to find any DNA or fingerprints, and prosecutors could not link the weapon to the case through ballistics testing. They had 2 pieces of paper belonging to Holly found on the road where Austin lived. But perhaps most damning was the testimony of Jason Autry himself, his detailed account of Holly's final hours, his admission to helping dispose of her body. his willingness to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a dramatically reduced sentence. September 2017. 6 years after Holly vanished, Zachary Adams finally faced a jury. The prosecution had one star witness, Jason Autry. Autry's testimony was chilling. He claimed he went to Austin's house to buy drugs and witnessed the cover-up. Holly's body was wrapped in a blanket in Zach's truck. They drove to the Tennessee River. When they unloaded the body, Holly was still alive. That is when Zach Adams allegedly shot her.
On my knees. She being right here. And at that time, I see the foot move, a movement, and a sound of distress that sound like, come out of her voice, come from the blanket. At that time, I walked to the door, to the passenger side door of the pickup, and Mr. Adams was digging in a fanny pack. I told him, I said, this fucking bitch is still alive. We just stopped for a second. I walked to the front of the truck, and I told Zach, I said, she's heard my name called and heard me talking and all. At that time, he wheels around, walks back to the driver's side pickup, out of the floorboard of the pickup, he pulls a pistol, the same pistol that was holstered on Mr. Austin's side at 30 Yellow Springs Road. I looked around and I told him that there was nothing coming close as clear, something to that effect. And at that time, boom, the gun sounded, the gun went off.
The defense fought back hard. No DNA evidence, no fingerprints, nothing linking Adams to the crime. More damaging, cell phone data contradicted Autry's timeline. For his story to work, the men would have had to drive 106 miles per hour on winding gravel roads. None of the accused matched Clint's description. The Adams brothers were too tall or heavy. Only Austin fit the physical description, but he had short red hair. Clint described long, dark hair. In a stunning twist, a former TBI agent testified for the defense. He told jurors he had ruled out these men early because their alibis checked out and cell phone records placed Adams miles away during the abduction. A TBI agent testifying for the defense against his own agency's prosecution. Think about what that means. What it takes for a law enforcement officer to stand up in court and say his own agency got it wrong. The jury now faced an impossible choice. Believe the star witness with every reason to lie, or believe the evidence that said he could not possibly be telling the truth. September 22nd, 2017. The verdict came in. Guilty on all charges. Zachary Adams was sentenced to life without parole plus 50 years. Dylan Adams took an Alford plea in January 2018, maintaining innocence while accepting a 35-year sentence. Jason Autry, whose testimony convicted Adams, served only 8 years. Released September 2020. Case closed. Justice served, or so it seemed. Now let me show you what happened next. What destroyed everything prosecutors had built. 7 years after the conviction. After Zach Adams had spent 7 years in prison for life without parole. After the Bobo family had finally found some measure of peace, Jason Autry decided to tell the truth, and what he said would shatter everything. And here is where everything falls apart, where the entire case collapses in spectacular fashion. January 2024. The case exploded again. Jason Autry filed a shocking admission from federal prison. He lied about everything. His entire testimony was fabricated. In his own words, Autry said he took a real day from his life and inserted Holly's murder into his timeline. He synchronized his lies with discovery evidence to make them believable. The man whose testimony put Adams away for life now admits he made it all up to get out of prison. In June 2024, The case returned to court. Holly's parents sat in the same courtroom where they had watched justice seemingly served 7 years earlier. The question now is not whether Holly was murdered. She was. The question is whether Tennessee convicted an innocent man while the real killer walks free. Think about what that means for every person involved in this case. Did the system fail Holly Bobo twice? Once by letting her killer escape and again by convicting the wrong person? If Zach Adams did not kill Holly Bobo, then who did? Terry Britt remains the elephant in the room. The registered sex offender who perfectly matched Clint's description was never cleared by the TBI. Britt had fabricated his alibi, claiming his wife stayed home to help install a bathtub. But investigators discovered she had actually gone to work that morning before he called and made her leave. The store had no record of the bathtub receipt they produced. Most damning, Britt could not be excluded as the source of a palm print found on Holly's car. This case exposes the dangerous pressure to solve high-profile crimes quickly. Dylan Adams, an intellectually disabled young man, was coerced into a confession that led to multiple arrests. Prosecutors withheld evidence, missed discovery deadlines, charged defendants without probable cause. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation briefly withdrew from the case entirely, accusing prosecutors of misconduct. When vulnerable people can be manipulated into false confessions and circumstantial evidence can send innocent people to prison for life. The system has failed everyone, including Holly. Holly Bobo was more than a victim. She was a daughter who called her parents every day, a sister who protected her little brother, a nursing student who dreamed of healing others, a young woman whose kindness touched everyone she met. Her legacy lives on in real change. The Holly Bobo Act expanded missing person alerts to include young adults up to age 21, helping other families avoid the delayed response that may have cost Holly her life. Highway 641 through Decatur County now bears her name. Dana and Karen Bobo continue their fight, not just for justice for Holly, but for truth. Their strength in the face of unimaginable loss reminds us that love endures even when hope is tested. Holly Bobo deserves to be remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived. With purpose, with compassion, and with dreams of making the world better. That is the legacy that matters. That is the Holly we should never forget. And until the truth finally comes to light, her story remains unfinished. If this coverage matters to you, subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Share this so Holly's name stays loud, so her story is never forgotten. Because behind every true crime story is a real person, a daughter, a sister, a friend. Holly Lynn Bobo mattered, and her story must be told. We are not done.